Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to today's edition of the Coal Scene. I'm Chris Hamilton, and I'll be your host over the next 28 minutes or so. Joining me in the studio today is Mr. Jason Bostic, Senior Vice President, West Virginia Coal Association. Hey, Jason. Hey, thanks for stopping by the studio.
Glad to be here.
I know you were just walking through the hallways here at the Capitol and just happened to come up on the television studio. So
Worked out very well.
worked out very well. Thanks so much. A lot going on. It seems like there's an awful lot going on. Some good, some bad, but never looking for activity or issues to deal with in the coal industry.
No, we don't ever have to go hunting for it, as you know. It usually shows up at the front door. But, as we're sitting here watching 2023 come to a close, it's been a very, very exciting year. Saw record demand in 2022, saw that sustain itself through a large part of 2023. Even though the stockpiles, at least the domestic plants, the utility plants, are probably a little above normal. There's been some disruption in the domestic market recently with operations having to come offline for various reasons. And we're still suffering from supply chain disruptions. We've got a lot of international issues. We've got, for example, I think there's 35 coal ships in queue off the East Coast waiting to receive loads of West Virginia metallurgical and thermal coal. So the market has calmed down a little bit, but I don't know that we're back to what I would call normal or stability. Because even though the stockpiles are high both domestically and internationally as far as thermal coal goes, it seems as though any slight disruption in the market causes an immediate response in pricing. And we typically don't see that. The volumes are high enough and U.S. production stable enough that it typically doesn't respond that way. But that's not what we're seeing so far through 2023, what's left of it. And I would expect that to continue through 2024, just telling us that the world energy market's still remarkably tight.
Also add to that, whenever you see some upheaval politically, or in the case of the Israel situation and attacks, that generally impacts world energy or regional energy markets anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Just as we saw in Ukraine, then all of a sudden the whole European community wanting to replace Russian oil and fuel, coal as well, and look for more friendlier places to provide that energy.
Yeah.
So I didn't see the real effect of the Israel conflict, but it's still something that's I think that's still in, it's safe to say it's still in transition. We're not sure where that ultimately is going to end up.
Absolutely. And we've, in addition to the upset in the Middle East, there's now shipping issues on the Panama Canal.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean for our importation in this country of oil, or, specific to the coal industry, our ability to ship coal internationally, particularly the Western coal, which they don't export much of it, but what they do export, about half of it, I think, has to go through the Panama Canal. And if they're suddenly having issues with water levels in the canal, what's going to be the resulting effect on the international coal market?
With the advent of office computers and everyone having iPhones, all of a sudden a lot of small local businesses were dealing in global markets. West Virginia Coal's been in global international markets and trade forever and a day.
Yeah, for the longest time, because I probably, at least as long as I have been around, coal exports were West Virginia's leading international export product. Mm-hmm. And for the, continuing today, we are the nation's largest coal exporting state.
Yes.
Our metallurgical volume kind of dwarfs everybody else in the country from a production standpoint, but certainly from an export standpoint. Although for the first time last year, Illinois and Pennsylvania tied West Virginia as an exporter of thermal or steam coal, which was kind of a surprise. Yeah.
But the overall met, as you indicated, or overall output, we are a major exporter domestically and internationally. But internationally, our product goes upwards of 35, 36 countries around the globe, and there's no question about it. We maintain the highest quality and most diverse met portfolio you'll find anywhere in the world. But the coal is truly the best coal that you can have for steel making.
Absolutely. And the logistics behind the international export of all coal, but particularly metallurgical coal, because of its specific qualities and the way that the international steel makers are so demanding in the individual specifications, that's probably one of the most complex trading operations internationally in the energy sector, if not completely.
Speaking of international, last year, 2022, and again this year, we've consumed more coal and produced more coal than ever before.
Quite a shock. And
It is a shock.
it's especially a shock after, you and I and everybody else in the coal business and just folks generally in this country have been told for the last 10 years that we're just 1 or 2 years away from seeing a dramatic drop in international coal consumption. And that hasn't proven true, but it was driven home in 2022 and likely going to be driven home again in 23 just because the jump was so dramatic, excuse me. And I think that's reflective of what we were talking about earlier, the tightness of the energy market and the fact that when it comes to making sure the lights are on and the heat's on or the air conditioning's on and that your manufacturing community continues to make what it needs for whatever country you're in, it's going to be coal as an energy source.
No question about it. Why? Well, it's plentiful. You can store it on site. You can maintain a supply in case you have an adverse weather condition that's somewhat prolonged. You can keep 30, 60, 90, 120 days supply on most sites. Base load generation.
And it's relatively easy to move.
And it produces energy on a 24/7 basis, nonstop. And as you well know, it's base load generation. It doesn't flow intermittently or occasionally if other conditions are present. So, and it's still a good deal.
Absolutely.
Talk to me a little bit about pricing. I know we've lost a little bit of the price, the values of the commodity here year to date, but it's still pretty strong.
Yeah, we're still doing okay. I mean, the pricing that we saw 21, 22, when we broke international records, the highest in the history of man, they've come back out of the stratosphere. But from a production standpoint and sustaining production, they're still pretty comfortable. Steam coal, 72 some odd dollars for southern West Virginia and about 60 some odd dollars for northern West Virginia, which is typically where we want to see them. Metallurgical coal pricing's come back down out of the stratosphere as well. It was as high as $600 a ton in 2022. It's back down to $200 to $300, which is normal, but it allows us to continue to sustain production and gives enough of a margin back at the mine after you deduct transportation that we can continue to invest to sustain the production.
Just a little side note to that, the pricing comments is, most of our members, they do have longer term contracts. At least they're not, majority of their coal's not on the spot market. And you hear these wide fluctuations in these stratosphere type pricing levels that you mentioned. And most of our coal here in West Virginia is saved from those extreme highs and lows, because of the contractual pricing and nature of our product.
Absolutely.
Plus we're sold out here for next 6 months, biggest part of 2024. Our product's already sold out because of those marketing contracts.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why those prices, as you know, were so astronomically high. The world needed that instantaneous response for energy, and not only West Virginia, other states, but particularly West Virginia, couldn't provide the increased production because of a number of issues. We've taken so much offline over the last 10 to 15 years, particularly in southern West Virginia. We couldn't bring that back so quickly. Couldn't find equipment, couldn't find trained employees, then we couldn't find the transportation, whether it was the railroad or the barge, to get it to the point of export or the point of consumption.
The other thing is, just remind myself, there's a lot of warnings out there that comes from FERC and NERC and some of the regional grid operators about, too many coal plants are closing, around the country, and it's leaving a void within this whole component of baseload generation. nothing provides the baseload generation that coal provides unless you're talking about nuclear.
That's right. And we've seen a lot of activity recently. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is kind of the overall governing body for the nation's electric grid, grid meaning distribution, generation, and consumption, held a forum, I believe it was last month, with a whole host of speakers from various points of view around the country, raising concerns about grid stability and reliability, particularly with respect to coal plants. And on top of that, or just before that, you had the North American Electric Reliability Council that does seasonal assessments of the grid to judge generation ability, and they issued their winter assessment for 23-24 and found that more than half of the country was at risk for a shortage. But one of the most interesting things, Chris, that's happened recently that I thought was really interesting is there is a power plant operator in Maryland that intended to close a roughly 1,600 megawatt power plant called Brandon Shores. And just for the folks at home in West Virginia, that's about the size of the Harrison Power Station in Harrison County. And the regional grid operator, which in this case was PJM, was so concerned about the closure of that single coal-fired power plant that it has asked FERC to prohibit the operator from closing it. Mm-hmm. And the impacts of closing that one power plant in Maryland would stretch for the entire state of Maryland, parts of northeastern Virginia, and even get as far into West Virginia, even though we've got our own coal-fired power stations. It would stretch into the Allegheny power system that's in northern West Virginia. So that's a pretty good, to me, that was a real eye-opener. A single coal plant raising the concern of a grid operator that much.
It seems like because mainly our Governor Justice and our political leadership have perfected, have guarded and protected our coal assets here in West Virginia. And I think that decision is going to prove to be very prudent here in years come because all of our infrastructure is still in place. We have these 8 in-state coal manufactured manufacturing plants. They generate electricity, mm-hmm. and they ship that. They export a lot of that electricity. We consume it here within the state, but then it's also shipped to Virginia, a little bit of Maryland, over to Kentucky, and because of having that ecosystem in place, all of a sudden the value of that product, baseload generation to these other states that have either expanded their renewable portfolio or have moved to some other alternative energy source, we're really going to be in a catbird seat here very, very soon. And that's just with our thermal product. Then we got this whole universe of metallurgical coal that's shipped throughout the country and world. We're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, because I think when you look at the domestic situation, forever and a day, and particularly demonstrated during Winter Storm Elliott, the coal-fired generation in West Virginia carried a large part of the central part of this country's demand during Winter Storm, what's called the MISO electric grid, which is essentially the center part of the country down to Texas. And it is routinely shipped south to the Carolinas, to Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. Again, even though they have their own power stations, their own power sources, they typically run short. But the way I see things developing, again, if the other states and other grid regions don't slow down their march to retire coal plants just for the sake of retiring them, I think West Virginia's thermal generation is going to be a lot like our international coal exports. More and more other states are going to look for us to carry their electric load. So it's just from a basic humanity quality of life standpoint, it's good that we continue to run our coal plants, and the government here, Governor Justice and the legislature's protected them. But I think for West Virginia consumers, because the more of that electricity we can sell off system out of the state and make a profit on it, that comes as a rate reduction to West Virginia electric consumers.
I spoke at an energy conference in Bridgeport, West Virginia a couple of weeks ago. First time I'd been up there in several months, and just looking over some of the coal facts that are pertinent to that area. I realized that the energy capital, if you will, of the north central part of our state has actually moved from Morgantown to the Clarksburg area. When you look at the coal production and the coal assets right around Bridgeport and Clarksburg, you know, it's phenomenal, and I'm not sure they fully realize it just yet. You have the Harrison mine that belongs to American Consolidated Natural Resources. And I think there's 500, 550 direct miners there. Then you have the Harrison Power Station, you know, right there in the middle of Clarksburg. And it has another 500 employees. And those two operations account for 2,000, 2,500 indirect employees, maintenance, mine reclamation, you know, and some of that work, coal transportation. Then just over the hill, you have this huge Arch Coal Complex in Taylor County and Upshur County and Barber County. Then you have the Century Mine. And you know, there's another 2,000 mining jobs, direct mining jobs at those operations. And then you have the mixture of thermal coal production, metallurgical coal production. You know, it's really amazing just within a 50-mile radius of Clarksburg and Bridgeport, you have that much mining activity.
Yeah, Chris, and the other thing that still amazes me, even though we're so close to it at the office, is the amount of new development. You know, in Barber, Upshur, and Taylor, you know, we're probably talking upwards of $3.5 billion. You know, those three metallurgical coal mines are all relatively new. Allegheny Met, for example, one of the Barber County operations, it's going to be in full production this year, but it's only been in development for about 2 years. Brand new investment in the coal industry in a place, you expect coal to be in the north central part of the state, but the resurgence, or I guess the new development of metallurgical coal, is something relatively new to that area. That's a great trend. It's good coal. We can develop it finally with the technology advancement, and the steel companies have gotten to the point with their coke making technology that coal's in much higher demand, particularly in Asia. You know, I think the bulk of that coal will depart the shores of this country in Baltimore or Hampton Roads, Virginia, for Asian steel makers in South Korea and Japan.
You know, just looking at the, you know, some of the developments, you mentioned the investment that's been made in those new operations in that particular area, and then throughout southern coal fields, we see expansion and new operations being put in, and you know, they're bringing in brand new equipment. These mines are computerized, really state-of-the-art mining complexes. Great experienced workforces. You're seeing the next generation of coal and coal mining being developed right now.
Absolutely, Chris. And even in the thermal coal side of the world, go back to Harrison County for just a second. You know, the Harrison County mine, which feeds the Harrison County Power Plant, recently did a major expansion, moved to a different reserve base, built entirely new mine infrastructure for the men to enter the mine, travel in and out every day. And you know, I think that's going to set the Harrison County mine up for the next 50 years of life.
I think so. And then look at the improvements that's been made to our other coal plants here within the state, from the Mitchell plant, the John Amos plant, the Mountaineer plant, First Energy's plants. I mean, those plants are now poised to run through 2040, 2050 at a minimum.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing about a coal plant, Chris, as you know, is they are such substantial infrastructure, and as long with routine maintenance and upkeep, a coal plant can continue to run forever, just about forever. You know, a coal plant could probably run about 100 years. Actually, we had some. You know, the Glen Lynn plant in Virginia was about 100 years when it closed recently, and we've had some in West Virginia that were about that old. So
I'll have to do some research, but the Windsor power plant comes to mind, up in the northern panhandle of the state. I know the Windsor mine celebrated a 100-year anniversary about 20 years ago, and that coal was fed to Windsor Powerhouse Station for a long period of time. I think that's why that mine was developed. So that could have had almost an equal history to it up there.
Yeah, it's just remarkable. Again, you know, the coal reserves that we have here are of such high quality, they demand that level of continued investment. And the same thing with the coal-fired power stations. And I think, again, as we continue to watch the nation retire just for the sake, what it looks like, just for the sake of retiring coal plants, the ones that are left will be much more valuable when the country finally comes to its senses, which is hopefully soon, that we're eliminating way too much baseload generation way too quickly.
You know, we almost lost the Pleasants plant. And in fact, it was shut down for a short period of time and it was restarted. Omnis Energy, Omnis Technologies is the new owner there. And of course, they're going to be making graphite and graphene, producing hydrogen, which in turn is going to fuel and run the plant. But where they're currently using 3-4 million tons of coal a year, it's my understanding through the graphene process and graphite, they stand to double the amount of coal that's actually consumed there. Everybody's really excited about that. Everybody's, I was going to say on pins and needles. That's not exactly true, but everybody's, you know, watching and, you know, just hoping for the best there.
Absolutely, and I think there's a two-sided benefit to that. So the Pleasants Power Station will continue to produce megawatts for the grid, and it'll also, with the graphene graphite production, continue to open the door for, you know, let's say the next generation or the next century of coal products. Because, you know, for years, as you know, for years we've used metallurgical coal and industrial coal to make everything, you know, obviously from steel, but the derivatives from coking coal have made plastics and ferroalloys and all this other just general consumer medication, all these other consumer products. But it's probably time to develop the next generation of those products, and we know that coal has so many of those inherent raw materials, if you will, trapped in a lump of coal. A lump of coal is just so much more than a carbon-based product that you can burn for heat. So I think that's very encouraging. You can make all kinds of things out of coal. And the next generation of materials like graphene, graphite, carbon fiber, so those things, it's all here buried under the ground in West Virginia, just like met coal and steam coal has been for years.
Well, you know, when you hear of the coal renaissance and coal making a comeback here and coal being sustained going forward, and in all probability will be a much bigger part of West Virginia's economy 10, 15, 20 years from now. You know, this helps attracting people to our business too.
It does.
You know, it helps changing that narrative, which is being pounded every day by a lot of liberal media sources out there and by actions of our federal government today. But we're going to overcome that. You know, those, you know, the Biden years will be behind us, and the insistence that we move and the transition away from all fossil energy, you know, and all be driving electric cars and using wind and solar devices on our homes, which most people thought was ludicrous when it was proposed. And here we're 3 years into it. It's not done anything but set back our economy in places and also, you know, just put people in the unemployment lines.
Yeah, I think one of the most telling things, Chris, recently is when climate envoy for the Biden administration, John Kerry, at the recent, whatever the most recent climate conference was, made the declaration that we're going to close all U.S. coal-fired power plants by X. I forget what the date was, whether it was 2030 or 2035. And that comment received little attention. And I think it's just for the fact that reality is very sobering. You were already, right now as we sit here, just like we mentioned earlier, there is a major grid operator concerned about the closure of a single coal-fired power plant. And John Kerry, with respect to delusional climate goals, you want to close all of them by 2035? That's just not going to happen.
And think about that.
Detachment from reality.
It is he is detached from reality with those kinds of statements. And, you know, what you have is a person, you know, of significant standing in this country. You mentioned he's the president's envoy for climate. And what he's advocating is putting hardworking Americans out of work. I mean, that's just, you know, un-American.
And
it's very callous.
And removing by administrative fiat about 20 to 25% of the remaining baseload generation in this country. And again, reality has to be sinking in. I think it is with the American public generally. That you just can't do that.
The coal industry still counts for employment for about 500 million people across the heartland. And, you know, about an equal amount of billions of dollars that are generated from this industry across America. You know, we just had the America's Coal Associations meeting, and the numbers of jobs that still exist from state to state. You know, here in West Virginia, it's 57,000 state jobs that are created and fulfilled by West Virginians who show up at a mine site every day. And it's still a $14–15 billion industry here for our state, and it's been reduced to half of what it was a decade ago.
One of the other interesting things, Chris, about the meeting we just came from was there wasn't a single state represented at that meeting that didn't raise concerns about the loss of baseload generation. And remember, as you know, these are coal producing states. So Wyoming, for example, because of its ties, the nation's leading coal production state, they have a tie to the coal industry. But you have those states that produce coal that are concerned about the loss of baseload generation. Think of all the other states like Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Indiana. Indiana mines coal, but some of the other states that don't actually mine coal that are just as concerned about the loss of generation.
We were out in Wyoming a couple times last year, and what a remarkable mining climate that the state of Wyoming, and those reserves are just phenomenal. You know, we joke about getting a leaf blower and blowing some vegetation, a little bit of topsoil away, and you have all of a sudden a 100-foot coal seam that's exposed. And they just they sit there and scoop it out like ice cream all day long and load those unit trains.
It's not so much mining as it
Not
is
so
harvesting.
much mining. Yeah, we invite them to come to West Virginia and look at the way real miners do it. So Wyoming's number one. We're still the second largest coal producing state, going to end the year at about 86–87 million tons.
I believe so. Yeah.
And the majority of that is thermal coal, about a 60–40 split between our thermal coal output and our metallurgical coal output.
Okay.
About 80%, maybe 85% of what we produce comes from underground mines.
Yes, we are the leading underground producer, and that number continues to go up every year.
That's a great summary, great point to probably conclude here. So we look forward to West Virginia Coal in 2024 and many years after that. Jason, thanks so much for coming by the studio, and thank you for joining us today on the television network. So with that, happy holidays and have a good day.